Silas Crowder did not look up from the harness he was mending. He knew the knock. 3 raps, a pause, then 2 more. The same pattern every time, patient as rain on a tin roof. It had been going on since the first hard frost, and it was nearly spring now. Josie pressed her whole face to the window glass, 7 years old and fogging it with her breath. She's got the blue cloth on her basket. That means bread. Move away from the window. She can see me anyway. She could. Ada Rennick stood on the porch step with the wind pulling at her skirts and a basket hooked over one arm, and when Josie waved, Ada lifted 2 fingers off the handle and waved back without smiling, the way a person waves at someone they have already decided they like. Silas set the harness down across his knee. 2 winters he had kept this door shut against the town. 2 winters of casseroles left on the step and church women peering past his shoulder into a house that had gone quiet as a stopped clock. He had learned to let them knock. They always gave up. Ada Rennick had not given up. She had knocked every Tuesday and every Friday since October, and it was March, and the count of it sat somewhere in the back of his mind like a debt he had not agreed to. Josie was already at the latch, up on her toes, both hands wrestling the iron. "Josie, I'm only opening it a little." The door swung wide, and the cold came in around Ada's boots, and Josie did not say hello. She reached straight up and took the corner of the blue cloth in her fist, the way a child takes hold of something she believes belongs to her. The arrangement had begun in a way that had nothing to do with kindness, which was the only reason Silas had allowed it at all. His sister Rachel had kept the house through the first winter after Ellen died. She had come from Nebraska with 2 trunks and a mouth set hard against grief, and she had cooked and swept and braided Josie's hair and never once let anyone in the family speak Ellen's name aloud. Then her husband's leg went bad in the fall, and she went home, and Silas stood in the kitchen at 4 in the morning, looking at a cold stove and a lunch pail and a child who would need boots by December. He had gone into Bitter Creek and asked at the Mercantile whether any woman in town would take on cooking and washing 3 days a week for $2 and a bushel of whatever the ranch had. The Mercantile owner had rubbed his jaw and looked at the ceiling and said the only one likely to take it was the Rennick widow, who kept the bake oven behind the laundry and had no one to answer to. "She's peculiar," he added. "Howe won't remarry." Been asked twice, Silas had considered that the best recommendation he had heard all year. Ada came out to the ranch the following Tuesday in a wagon she drove herself, which the town also held against her. She was 31 years old, wide through the shoulders, with flour worked permanently into the creases of her knuckles and a face that gave nothing away until she chose to give it. She walked into his kitchen, looked at the sink, looked at the flue, looked at the sack of beans gone weevily in the corner, and did not say one word about how a man lets a house go. 3 days, she stated, hanging her coat on a nail as though she had hung it there for years. Tuesday, Friday, and one more when you need it. I will not touch her mother's things. You will tell me where they are so I don't touch them by accident. The blue chest in the back room. And the mirror. Then, that's settled. She had worked until dark. When she left, the stove had been blacked, the flue drew clean, and there was a pot of beans and salt pork on the back plate that would feed them 3 days. She took her $2 without counting it. What Silas had not agreed to, what nobody had discussed, was the knocking. Because Ada came Tuesday and Friday as arranged, and then she also came on the Sunday when the snow shut the pass, walking the last mile with bread inside her coat to keep it warm. She came the morning after the calf shed roof went down, and did not mention the roof and left a pan of cornbread on the sill. She came in January when Josie had the croup, sat up 2 nights in the kitchen with a kettle going, and drove home in the dark without waking him to say goodbye. He paid her for none of those days, She never once asked. "You are not owed for Sunday," he told her one week, holding out the coins anyway. "No." She put her hands behind her back like a child refusing medicine. "I'm not." And she came the next Sunday too. The first thing Silas noticed, though he told himself he was not noticing anything, was the plate. It happened in December, on an evening that had no business being remarkable. Ada had gone home at dusk. He came in from the barn with his hands raw from the pump handle and found Josie at the table setting out supper, which was her job and had been since she was 5, and there were 3 plates down instead of 2. "She's gone home, Josie." "I know." "Then put it back." Josie looked at the plate. Then she looked at him with the flat, immovable calm that she had gotten from her mother and that he had never once been able to argue with. "She might come back." "She won't come back tonight." "She might." He put the plate back in the cupboard himself. In the morning it was on the table again. He stopped putting it away after the 4th time. It was easier. That was what he told himself, standing at the stove with his coffee going cold. It was easier than fighting a 7-year-old about crockery. Then it was the coat. Ada wore a gray wool coat with a mended elbow, and she hung it on the nail by the door every working day, and one Friday in January she could not find it. She looked behind the flour barrel and under the bench and in the back hall. Josie sat on the woodbox swinging her feet and watching her look. "Josie," Silas started, "I don't know where it is." "Josephine," the girl went red to her ears and would not answer. Ada crouched down in front of the woodbox, not touching her, hands loose on her knees. "If I can't find my coat," she reasoned quietly, "I will freeze on the road, and then I could not come Tuesday." Josie's chin went hard. "You could stay." The kitchen was very quiet. The kettle ticked. Silas stood in the doorway with a lamp in his hand and felt something turn over in his chest, slow and heavy, like a stone shifting under water. Ada did not look at him. That was the thing he thought about afterward, lying awake in the dark listening to the wind come off the ridge. She could have looked at him. Any other woman in that county would have looked at him. "I have to go home tonight," Ada explained. Still crouched, still gentle. "But a person who comes back on Tuesday is not the same as a person who leaves. Do you know the difference?" Josie shook her head. "Then I will show you. Tuesday, and you will see that I was telling the truth. The coat was behind the blue chest in the back room. Josie fetched it herself, dragging it by one sleeve, and Ada took it and thanked her as gravely as if she had been handed a deed to land. Silas walked her out to the wagon. The stars were out hard and white, and their breath went up together in the cold. "I'll speak to her about it." "Don't." She had no right. She had every right. Ada set the basket in the wagon bed and pulled her gloves on, one finger at a time. She is 7 years old, and the last woman who hung a coat on that nail did not come back. You cannot reason a child out of a thing she learned that way. You can only outlast it. Then she climbed up and shook the reins and left him standing in his own yard with nothing at all to say. She came Tuesday. The winter turned mean in February. The creek froze past the bend, the south pasture went hard as iron, and the $200 Silas owed the bank in Bitter Creek came due in May, which had seemed a long way off in October and did not seem far off now. He lost 11 head in 1 week. He came in at midnight with ice in his beard and found Ada asleep, sitting up in the kitchen chair with Josie sprawled across her lap and a pot of something hot on the stove and the ledger book open on the table where he had left it. She woke when the door shut. She saw him see the ledger. "I did not read it," she stated. "It fell. I closed it. You can read it if you want. I don't want." But 3 days later, without a word to him about any of it, she began doing arithmetic in the kitchen. Ada Rennick had kept books for her husband's freight business before he died, a fact that nobody in Bitter Creek had ever asked her about, because in Bitter Creek she was the woman who baked bread and would not remarry. She started small. She noticed that Silas was buying flour in 10-pound sacks at the mercantile at town prices, and that the freight wagon out of Cheyenne came through on the 15th of every month and would sell a 100-pound sack off the back for less than half. She noticed he was selling his beef through a buyer who took a commission of 8% and paid in 90 days. She noticed that the calf shed roof, which he had been meaning to shingle since October, was letting snow onto the feed, and that he was losing more hay to rot than the shingles would cost. She said none of it out loud. She wrote it on the back of a flour sack in pencil in a small square hand and left it under the sugar tin where he would find it and where nobody watching would have seen her hand it to him. Silas found it on a Thursday. He sat down on the bench by the door and read it twice, and then a third time, and something in his throat went tight and stayed that way. $22 a year on flour, $16 on the buyer's commission if he hauled to the railhead himself, $9 of hay saved by $4 of shingles. At the bottom of the sack, in the same small square hand, she had written, "And this is only what I could see from the kitchen." He did not thank her for it. He did not know how, and he suspected she would not have wanted it. What he did instead was shingle the calf shed roof in the first thaw and haul his own beef in April and buy flour off the freight wagon on the 15th. And when he counted the money in the tin in May, it was $41 more than it should have been, which was not enough to save the ranch but was enough to keep the bank from taking it that year. He stood in the barn with the tin in his hands and understood, with a plainness that frightened him, that he had been carrying the whole weight of that place alone for 2 years, and that a woman had walked into his kitchen and set part of it down for him without ever once asking to be allowed. That was the first day he let himself look at her. She was at the pump with her sleeves pushed up past the elbow, hauling water in the flat gray light. Josie was hanging on the pump handle being no help at all. Ada was laughing at something the child had said, an unguarded laugh with her head tipped back, and the sound of it carried across the yard. Silas went back into the barn and stayed there an hour. The trouble came from the church, the way trouble usually did. Mrs. Delia Hollis was the wife of the man who held the note on the Crowder place, and she had a way of speaking about people's souls in the tone other women used for weather. In the last week of April, she stopped Ada outside the mercantile with 3 other women arranged behind her like fence posts. "We have been saying," Delia began, "that you are out at the Crowder place a great deal. I am, on days you are not employed. Yes, it is a lonely road, Mrs. Rennick. A person's reputation is easier lost than a hat." Ada shifted the basket to her other arm. Was there a question in that? There was not, of course. That was the whole art of it. Delia Hollis smiled the way a door closes. Ada would not have told him. Silas heard it 3 days later from the blacksmith, who had heard it from his wife, who had been the second fence post from the left. He heard the word they were using. He heard that it had gotten as far as the school, because a boy had asked Josie in the schoolyard whether the bread lady was going to be her new mother or just her father's friend, and Josie had punched him in the mouth. Silas rode home that evening with his jaw set and a coldness in him he had not felt since the week Ellen died. Ada was in the kitchen. She had heard him come in, and she went on cutting biscuit rounds out of the dough with the rim of a cup, one after another, very steady. "You should not come out here on Sundays any more." The cup stopped. "All right. Nor on the days I don't pay you." "All right. I mean it. I heard you the first time." She lifted the round of dough, set it on the pan, and pressed the cup into the sheet again. Her hands did not shake. "Is that what you want?" "It's not about what I want." "Then it's a poor reason." Another round. Another, "Silas, look at me." He did not want to. He did it anyway. Ada Rennick was 31 years old, and there was flour on her wrist and gray coming in at her temple already, and she was looking at him the way a person looks across a table at someone they have decided about a long time ago and simply been waiting on. "Say the real thing," she prompted. And so he did, and it came out wrong and blunt and half angry, the way everything true came out of him. "You keep knocking on my door, people will talk." Ada laughed. It was not a small laugh. It came up out of her like something that had been held down a long while, warm and rough and entirely unbothered, and she set the cup down on the board and wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him with her eyes bright. "Let them. Ada, let them talk." She came around the end of the table. "Do you know what they said about me when I would not marry Harold Pruitt? Do you know what they said when I would not marry the deacon's brother either? They talked for 4 years. I am still standing here. My bread still rises." She stopped an arm's length from him. "The town has never once given me a single thing I could eat. Why in God's name would I hand it a say?" The stove ticked. Out in the yard a horse shifted and blew. "I have a child," he stated, which was not an argument, and both of them knew it. Yes, something moved across Ada's face then, quick, and she got it under control the way she got everything under control. "You do. And I would like you to notice that I have never once in 7 months used her to get at you. I could have. She would have let me." She went back to the biscuits. Silas stood in the middle of his own kitchen with his hat still in his hand and did not go out to the barn, which was the first time in 2 years he had stayed. The church supper was the second Sunday in May, in the long room behind the chapel, with the trestle tables end to end, and every woman in Bitter Creek's best dish laid out down the middle. Silas had not intended to go. Josie had laid out her own dress on the bed at dawn and stood beside it without saying anything until he gave in. Ada had sent a pie out with the Thursday delivery. Dried apple, with a lattice on the top and the edges crimped in the pattern she used, and she had not come out to the ranch since the conversation in the kitchen, because he had told her not to, and she was a woman who did what she said she would do even when it cost her. It cost her. He knew it cost her. Josie had asked after her every single evening for 11 days, and he had run out of ways to answer. The pie sat at the middle of the table, and it went first, the way it always did. And Delia Hollis stood at the head of the table with a serving knife in her hand and her voice pitched to Carrie. "And this handsome pie," she announced, sweet as syrup, "who is this one from?" "I don't believe I know the hand." Nobody answered. 14 women knew that hand. Every one of them had a mouthful of it. Delia turned, still smiling, and let her eyes settle on Josie Crowder, 7 years old, in her Sunday dress, with her plate on the bench in front of her. "Josephine, do you know who made this pie?" The room went quiet in that particular way rooms do when everyone has agreed in advance to enjoy something. Silas started to rise. Josie got there first. She stood up on the bench so that she was taller than the table, so that she could be seen by the whole long room, and she said it clearly, without a wobble, the way you announce a thing that has already been true for months and simply had not been mentioned. "My mama made it." Nobody breathed. Delia Hollis's smile came apart at the corners. "Child, your mother has passed. I had one before." Josie's hands were fists at her sides. "And I have one now. She comes on Tuesdays and Fridays, and she came when I was sick, and she stayed both nights, and she does not ever go without saying she is coming back." Her voice climbed and cracked, and she did not stop. "And Papa told her not to come anymore, and she stopped, and it has been 11 days, and I want her back." The last of it came out as a wail, the way things do when a child has been holding them for 11 days. Silas came down the bench and got his arms around her. She was shaking. He picked her up bodily, 7 years old and too big to be carried, and she put her face into his collar and held on with both fists. The room was silent. 40 people. Not one of them said a word. Silas Crowder looked over his daughter's head at Delia Hollis and did not raise his voice at all. She's right. Then he carried his child out of the church supper and did not go back for his hat. He did not go to Ada's that night. He wanted to. He sat on the porch step until the moon was over the ridge, and he wanted to, and he did not, because he had learned something about that woman in 7 months, and it was this. Ada Rennick did not want to be told. She had been told things her whole life. She had been told to remarry and told to sell the bake oven and told what the town would say, and she had gone on standing in her own kitchen at 4 a.m. with her sleeves pushed up. Words were cheap out here. Everybody had them. Her husband had probably had a great many of them. So Silas did the only thing he knew how to do, which was work. He was up before light on Monday. He rode into Bitter Creek and stood in the lumberyard when it opened and bought oak, planed and seasoned, which cost more than he had any business spending in the same month a note came due. He bought a strap hinge and a latch. He came home and he took the front door of his house off its hinges and laid it across 2 sawhorses in the yard and looked at it. It was the door Ellen had painted the winter they married. He had not opened it wide in 2 years. He worked on the new one for 4 days. Josie sat on the woodpile and handed him things and did not ask what it was for, because she had already worked it out. He planed the boards and fit them and set the hinge and hung it true, and on the 4th evening he stood back and looked at it in the last of the light. Then he took his knife and bored a hole through the door above the latch. He cut a length of rawhide, knotted it through the latch bar on the inside, and fed the loose end out through the hole so it hung down the outside face of the door. A latch string. The oldest thing in the world. Any child on that frontier knew what it meant. If the string hangs out, you do not knock. You pull it, and the latch lifts, and you walk into that house because you are of that house. He gave it to Josie to pull first. She had to jump for it. It lifted, and the door swung in, and she stood in the doorway of her own home laughing with her hands over her mouth. "Now go get her," Silas told her. Ada Rennick came out on Tuesday morning because it was Tuesday, and because 11 days had turned into 15, and because she had decided somewhere around the 3rd night that she was going to go out there and be told to leave to her face, and at least have that. She came up the track with the sun behind her and the basket on the seat beside her, and she got down and crossed the yard the way she had crossed it 200 times, and she raised her hand to knock. And stopped. The door was new, pale oak, still smelling of the plain. And hanging down the front of it, swinging a little in the morning wind, was a knotted length of rawhide. Ada Rennick stood in that yard for a long moment, with her hand still lifted. Then the door opened from the inside anyway, because Josie could not wait, and the girl came off the step at a dead run and hit her around the middle hard enough to knock the breath out of her, and Ada went down on her knees in the dirt and held on. Silas came out onto the step with his hands hanging at his sides and no speech prepared, because he had never once in his life had a speech prepared. "It pulls from the outside," he explained. Ada, on her knees, with her arms full of somebody's daughter, looked up at him. "I know what it is." "Then you know I'm not asking you to come Tuesdays." "No." Her voice was not steady. It was the first time he had ever heard it not steady. "You're not. They'll talk." And Ada Rennick started laughing, right there in the dirt of his yard with her hat gone crooked and her eyes wet, laughing the way she had laughed in the kitchen with the flour on her wrists. Let them. They were married in June by a circuit preacher, in the yard, with 8 people present and none of them named Hollis. Ada wore the gray wool coat over her good dress because the morning came up cold, and Josie carried the ring in a tin that had once held sugar, and would not give it up until the very last second, and then gave it up. The bank got its $200 in the fall, hauled to the railhead by Silas himself, with no commission taken out, and the calf shed roof held through the whole of the next winter. The town talked for about 5 months. Then the Pruitt boy ran off with a dealer's daughter from Laramie, and everyone found something better to do. Some evenings now, when the work is done and the lamp is lit, Silas Crowder stands in his own doorway and looks out at the dark coming down over the south pasture, and behind him he can hear the two of them at the table, arguing pleasantly about the correct way to crimp a pie edge. And on the outside of that door, all night, in every weather, the latch string hangs down where a small hand can reach it. He has never once pulled it in.